The morning sun filtered through the newly installed glass storefront of Riverside Boutique. The shop had only been open for 3 weeks, but it was already drawing attention in the neighborhood, with its carefully curated collection of clothing, accessories, and home goods. Most items were priced just high enough to feel special, but not so expensive that the longtime residents of the changing neighborhood couldn't treat themselves occasionally. Eleanor Johnson walked slowly along the sidewalk, her cane tapping a gentle rhythm as she made her way toward the boutique. At 78, she moved with the deliberate care of someone who had learned that rushing only led to accidents. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and despite the summer heat, she wore a pressed blouse buttoned to the collar and a knee-length skirt. Eleanor had been dressing properly for outings since she was a girl, and she wasn't about to change now. No matter what the younger folks thought about casual comfort, might as well see what all the fuss is about, she muttered to herself as she approached the store. Several of her friends from church had mentioned the new shop, commenting on the reasonable prices and unique items. Eleanor wasn't one to follow trends, but she did need a gift for her granddaughter's upcoming graduation. A small bell chimed as Eleanor pushed open the door. Cool air washed over her, a welcome relief from the heat outside. The boutique was larger than it appeared from the street, with polished wooden floors and displays arranged to create a winding path through the merchandise. Eleanor took a moment to get her bearings, noting with approval that there were several chairs placed throughout the store where customers could rest. Behind the counter, Jasmine Chen straightened a stack of business cards and fought back a yawn. At 23, she was the newest employee at Riverside Boutique, hired just 8 days ago. Her training had been rushed. The store manager had called in sick for most of her first week, and she felt constantly on edge, worried about making mistakes. This morning had been particularly slow, and Jasmine was already counting the hours until her lunch break. When the bell chimed, she looked up and plastered on the customer service smile she'd perfected during 3 years of retail work through college. The old woman who entered didn't look like their usual clientele. Most customers were young professionals or trendy 30-somethings with disposable income. Jasmine had been told to focus special attention on those who looked like serious shoppers, and in her experience, elderly customers often browsed without buying. "Welcome to Riverside," Jasmine called out with practiced cheerfulness. "Let me know if you need any help finding something." Eleanor nodded in acknowledgement but didn't approach the counter. She preferred to look around on her own first. Hovering salespeople made her nervous, always had. She began to make her way through the store, pausing to examine a display of colorful scarves that caught her eye. As she moved through the boutique, Eleanor was pleased to discover that many items were both practical and attractive. She ran her fingers over a soft throw blanket, admired a set of hand-painted coffee mugs, and even considered a stylish but sensible handbag for herself. Perhaps her friends were right about this place. Near the back of the store, Eleanor found a glass cabinet containing jewelry. The pieces weren't flashy or overly expensive, just the kind of thing her granddaughter Tanya might appreciate. A small silver necklace with a pendant shaped like a book caught her attention. Tanya was studying literature and had always been a reader. It seemed perfect. Eleanor looked around for assistance but didn't see any employees nearby. The young woman who had greeted her was now helping another customer at the front. Eleanor spotted a small bell on the counter next to the jewelry case and gave it a gentle tap. While waiting, she continued to browse the nearby shelves. A collection of small decorative items was arranged on a tiered display stand. Eleanor leaned closer to examine what appeared to be hand-carved wooden animals. As she reached out to pick one up, her cane shifted against the smooth floor. What happened next occurred in a matter of seconds. Eleanor felt her cane slipping and instinctively grabbed for the nearest surface to steady herself. Her hand caught the edge of the display stand, which wobbled precariously. She managed to regain her balance, but not before several of the wooden figures tumbled to the floor with a series of small clunks. "Oh dear," Eleanor murmured, embarrassed by the commotion. She carefully leaned her cane against the wall and bent down slowly to pick up the fallen items. Jasmine had just finished with her customer when she heard the noise. She turned quickly and saw the elderly woman bending down near a now disorganized display. The past week had been stressful, with her supervisor constantly reminding the staff about inventory shrinkage and keeping an eye out for shoplifters. The store manager had mentioned that sometimes shoplifters created distractions to pocket merchandise. Without taking a moment to assess the situation, Jasmine rushed over. All she saw was a customer near a disturbed display, picking something up and putting it in a pocket. She didn't notice that Eleanor was simply collecting the fallen items to place them back on the shelf. "Excuse me," Jasmine called out sharply.
"What do you think you're doing?"
Eleanor looked up, startled by the harsh tone. "I'm just picking these up. They fell when I saw you putting something in your pocket," Jasmine interrupted, her voice rising. The stress of the week, combined with her insecurity about her new job, fueled her accusation. "You need to show me what you took." Two other customers browsing nearby turned to watch the interaction. Eleanor's face flushed with embarrassment and confusion. "Young lady, I didn't take anything. These little carvings fell and I was picking them up," Eleanor explained, her voice steady despite her discomfort with being the center of attention. Jasmine stepped closer, her posture confrontational. "Then you won't mind showing me what's in your pockets?" Eleanor straightened up as much as her arthritis would allow, dignity evident in every inch of her 5'4" frame. "I most certainly will mind. I've never stolen anything in my life, and I'm not about to be treated like a thief now." Something in Jasmine snapped. Later, she would struggle to explain why she reacted so strongly. Perhaps it was the pressure from management about preventing theft. Or maybe it was the authoritative way this elderly woman spoke to her, as if Jasmine was the one doing something wrong. Whatever the reason, Jasmine made a terrible decision. She reached out and grabbed Eleanor's arm, her fingers digging into the soft skin. "Empty your pockets right now or I'm calling security." The suddenness of the action, combined with Eleanor's already precarious balance, had immediate consequences. Eleanor lost her footing, her cane out of reach against the wall. She fell backward, landing hard on the wooden floor. The boutique went silent. Then a woman shopping nearby gasped, "Did you just push her down? What is wrong with you?" Eleanor sat on the floor, more shocked than hurt. In her 78 years, she had never been handled so roughly, certainly not in a place of business. The physical pain was minimal compared to the sting of humiliation that washed over her. I wasn't," Jasmine stammered, the reality of what she'd done beginning to sink in. "She was stealing." "She wasn't stealing anything," said a man who had witnessed the entire interaction. "She knocked some things over by accident and was picking them up. You need to call your manager right now." Other customers gathered around, some offering assistance to Eleanor, others watching Jasmine with open disapproval. A young woman helped Eleanor to her feet and retrieved her cane. "Are you all right, ma'am?" she asked gently. "Do you need us to call someone?" Eleanor straightened her clothes with trembling hands. "I'm fine, thank you." But the slight quaver in her voice betrayed her distress. By now, another employee had hurried over from a different section of the store. Thomas, who had been working at Riverside since its opening, took in the scene with dismay. "What happened here?" he asked, looking from Eleanor to Jasmine to the small crowd of onlookers. "Your colleague here accused this lady of stealing, grabbed her arm, and caused her to fall," explained one of the witnesses. "It was completely uncalled for." Thomas turned to Jasmine with wide eyes. "You did what?" Jasmine's face had gone pale. I saw her put something in her pocket. I was just doing what we were trained to do about shoplifters." "We were never trained to physically confront customers," Thomas cut in sharply. He turned to Eleanor with genuine concern. "Ma'am, I am so incredibly sorry. Please, let's get you seated comfortably. Can I get you some water? Do you need medical attention?" Eleanor allowed herself to be led to one of the chairs near the fitting rooms. Her heart was still racing, but she was determined not to show how shaken she felt. "I would like to speak to the owner of this establishment," she said, her voice quiet but firm. Thomas nodded. "Of course. I'll call the manager right away and he can contact the owner." As Thomas stepped away to make the call, Eleanor sat straight-backed in the chair, her hands folded in her lap. She was aware of the whispers and glances from other customers, some of whom were leaving the store in apparent disgust. Jasmine stood awkwardly nearby, her earlier confidence replaced by growing dread as she realized the seriousness of her actions. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. What had started as a simple shopping trip had turned into something altogether different. And while she didn't yet know how this situation would resolve, one thing was certain. This was not the end of the matter. Not by a long shot. The quiet hum of the boutique's air conditioning seemed unnaturally loud in the awkward silence that had fallen. Eleanor sat with perfect posture in the chair Thomas had guided her to, her weathered hands folded neatly in her lap. Though her expression remained composed, the slight tremble in her fingers betrayed her inner turmoil. In her 78 years, she had faced her share of indignities, but being physically accosted in a store and accused of theft was something she never could have anticipated during her morning errands. Thomas returned from the back office, a glass of water in one hand and his cell phone in the other. "Ms. Johnson, I've called our manager, Mark. He's on his way, should be here in about 15 minutes. He's also reaching out to the owner." He offered her the water with a gentle smile that couldn't quite mask his concern. "Are you sure you don't want us to call someone for you? Family, perhaps? Or a doctor?" Eleanor accepted the water with a nod of thanks. "I don't need a doctor, young man. I may be old, but I'm not fragile." She took a small sip before adding, "As for family, let's just wait for your manager. I'd prefer to handle this properly." Across the store, Jasmine stood behind the counter, her face a mixture of defensiveness and growing dread. She busied herself straightening already neat stacks of tissue paper, avoiding eye contact with the remaining customers who occasionally glanced between her and the elderly woman with undisguised disapproval. "I was just doing my job," she muttered to herself, though the justification rang hollow even in her own ears. In truth, she had acted impulsively, channeling a week's worth of stress and insecurity into that moment. The store manager had emphasized loss prevention during her brief training, mentioning that employee bonuses were tied to keeping shrinkage low. But no one had ever suggested physically confronting customers. The bell above the door chimed and Mark Henderson hurried in. At 34, he had the harried look of a mid-level manager with too many responsibilities. His button-up shirt was slightly rumpled and his tie hung loosely around his neck, suggesting he had dressed in a hurry. He spotted Thomas first and made a beeline for him, lowering his voice as he approached. "What happened?" "Your call made it sound serious." Thomas didn't bother keeping his voice down. "Jasmine accused a customer of shoplifting, grabbed her arm, and the lady fell. There were witnesses." He nodded toward Eleanor. "That's her there, Ms. Johnson." Mark's face fell as he took in the situation. The elderly black woman sitting primly in the chair, the subdued atmosphere of the store, and the few remaining customers who seemed to be lingering more out of curiosity than shopping interest. This was exactly the kind of incident that could sink a new business, especially one trying to establish itself in a changing neighborhood. He approached Eleanor with his most professional smile. "Ms. Johnson, I'm Mark Henderson, the manager of Riverside Boutique. I want to personally apologize for what happened today. This is not how we train our staff to behave, and I assure you that we will address this immediately." Eleanor looked up at him, her gaze direct and unwavering. "Mr. Henderson, I didn't come here today expecting to be treated like a criminal. I certainly didn't expect to be put hands on and knocked to the floor." Her voice remained steady, but there was steel beneath the calm. "I'd like to know what you plan to do about this." Mark nodded quickly. Of course. First, let me assure you that we take this extremely seriously. We'll be conducting a full review of what happened, including checking our security footage. As for immediate actions," and he hesitated, then continued, "we'd like to offer you a store credit as a gesture of goodwill, and of course, if you've sustained any injuries or damages." "I'm not interested in store credit," Eleanor interrupted. "And while I appreciate that you're taking this seriously, what I want is to speak with the owner." Mark shifted uncomfortably. "I've reached out to Dr. Johnson, but he's currently in a meeting across town. I'm fully authorized to handle this situation on his behalf." At the mention of the owner's name, a flicker of something crossed Eleanor's face, so brief that Mark missed it entirely. She simply nodded and said, "Then I'll wait." Meanwhile, Jasmine had been summoned to the back office by another employee who had witnessed part of the incident. Away from customer eyes, she paced the small room, running her hands through her hair. "I can't believe this is happening," she said to no one in particular. "It's my second week. I was just trying to do the right thing." The door opened and Thomas stepped in. "Mark wants to see the security footage, and he'll want to talk to you after he's done with the customer." Jasmine slumped into a chair. "Is she pressing charges? Am I fired?" Thomas shrugged, his expression unsympathetic. "Don't know. But honestly, what were you thinking? We never touch customers, especially not like that." "I panicked, okay? I thought she was stealing. and all I could think about was how Mark kept going on about inventory shrinkage during my training. Jasmine buried her face in her hands. I didn't mean for her to fall. Thomas was about to respond when the office phone rang. He picked it up, listened for a moment, then hung up with a grim expression. That was the front desk. Dr. Johnson just pulled up. Jasmine looked up, confusion momentarily replacing anxiety. The owner? Why would he come in for this? Doesn't he have like 3 other businesses to run? Guess we're about to find out. Thomas headed for the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I hope you don't lose your job over this. But that lady out there, she deserves better than what happened today. Back on the sales floor, Eleanor had politely refused further offers of assistance from both Mark and concerned customers. She sat quietly, occasionally sipping her water, her expression giving away nothing of her thoughts. She had lived through enough in her lifetime to know the value of patience. The bell above the door chimed again, and a tall man in his 50s entered the boutique. He wore a charcoal gray suit that fit his athletic frame perfectly, and despite the summer heat, he looked cool and composed. His close-cropped hair was peppered with gray at the temples, and wire-rimmed glasses framed intelligent eyes that scanned the store quickly. Mark immediately crossed to meet him. Dr. Johnson, thank you for coming so quickly. I was just speaking with, where is she? Dr. Raymond Johnson's deep voice was quiet but carried an unmistakable note of authority. Mark blinked in surprise at being cut off. The customer? She's seated over by the fitting rooms. I've offered our sincerest apologies but Dr. Johnson was already moving past him, heading directly toward Eleanor. As he approached, his professional demeanor softened, concern evident in his expression. Mom, are you all right? The few remaining customers looked on in surprise as Eleanor reached up to take her son's offered hand. I'm fine, Raymond. Just a little shaken up, Mark froze mid-step, his mouth slightly open as the pieces clicked into place. Dr. Raymond Johnson, respected physician, entrepreneur, and owner of not just this boutique but several successful businesses in the city, was the son of the elderly woman his employee had accused of shoplifting. Your mother? He finally managed to say, his voice strained. Ms. Johnson is your mother. Dr. Johnson didn't take his eyes off Eleanor as he answered. Yes, she is. Now, would someone like to explain to me why my mother was on the floor of my store? From behind the counter, Jasmine watched the scene unfold with growing horror. The distinguished-looking man helping the elderly woman to her feet was the owner, the same owner whose name she had seen on her employment contract, whose business philosophy was framed on the wall in the break room, and the woman she had accused of stealing, the woman she had grabbed roughly enough to cause her to fall, was his mother. Oh no, she whispered, feeling the blood drain from her face. Oh no, no, no. Thomas appeared beside her. Yeah, that's exactly what I was coming to tell you. Mark was now speaking rapidly to Dr. Johnson, gesturing toward the security cameras and then toward the back office. Dr. Johnson listened with a deepening frown, his hand remaining supportively on his mother's shoulder. I'd like to see that footage, he said when Mark finished, and I'd like to speak with the employee involved. His tone made it clear these weren't requests. Eleanor placed her hand over her son's. Raymond, let's discuss this privately first. She glanced around at the remaining customers who were trying and failing to pretend they weren't watching the drama unfold. There's no need to make more of a scene. Dr. Johnson studied his mother's face for a moment, then nodded. Mark, is my office available? Of course, sir. Right this way. As they walked toward the back of the store, Dr. Johnson supporting his mother with a gentle hand under her elbow, they passed directly by the counter where Jasmine stood. Eleanor's eyes met Jasmine's briefly, her gaze neither angry nor forgiving, simply observant, taking the measure of the young woman who had treated her so poorly. Jasmine opened her mouth as if to speak, but no words came. What could she possibly say that would make this situation any better? Dr. Johnson glanced at her as they passed, his expression unreadable behind his glasses. Then they were past the counter and disappearing into the hallway that led to the owner's office. Thomas leaned close to Jasmine's ear. Mark wants you to wait here until they're ready to talk to you. Jasmine nodded numbly, her throat too tight to speak. The reality of what she had done and who she had done it to was sinking in with crushing weight. She had acted on impulse and prejudice, making assumptions based on age and appearance. Now her job, her reputation, and her self-image were all hanging in the balance. In the sudden quiet of the nearly empty store, the ticking of the wall clock seemed deafening. For Jasmine, each second that passed was another moment to contemplate just how badly she had misjudged the situation, and how much that misjudgment might cost her. The owner's office at the back of Riverside Boutique was a tasteful blend of modern and traditional elements. A sleek glass desk dominated one side of the room, while comfortable leather chairs and a small sofa created a more casual meeting area. Family photos lined one wall, graduation ceremonies, holiday gatherings, and milestone celebrations chronicling the Johnson family's journey. Through the years, Raymond helped his mother settle into one of the leather armchairs before taking a seat beside her rather than behind his desk. Mark hovered uncertainly near the door, his tie now completely loosened and hanging like an afterthought around his neck. "Would you prefer if I stepped out, Dr. Johnson?" Mark asked, gesturing vaguely toward the door. Raymond looked to his mother, who gave a small nod. "Yes, Mark, give us a few minutes. But don't go far. We'll need to review the security footage together, and I want to speak with the employee involved." "Of course, sir. I'll be right outside." Mark backed out of the office, closing the door quietly behind him. For a moment, mother and son sat in silence. Eleanor smoothed an invisible wrinkle from her skirt, a habit she'd had for as long as Raymond could remember. It was something she did when gathering her thoughts, when deciding exactly how to approach a difficult conversation. "How are you really, Mom?" Raymond finally asked, his professional composure giving way to genuine concern. "And don't tell me you're fine. I know you better than that." Eleanor looked up at her son, this accomplished man who still looked to her with the same respect and love he had shown as a boy. "My pride is hurt more than anything else, Raymond. To be treated that way in front of strangers—" She shook her head slightly. "It brings back memories I'd rather not revisit." Raymond's jaw tightened. As a black man who had navigated medical school, built a successful practice, and ventured into business ownership, he was no stranger to prejudice and assumptions. But it was different hearing about his mother being treated this way, in his own establishment no less. "The employee will be let go immediately," he said, his voice leaving no room for debate. "And we'll review our hiring and training procedures to ensure nothing like this happens again." Eleanor reached over and placed her hand on her son's arm. "Before you make any decisions, I want you to hear what I have to say." Her voice was gentle but firm, the same tone she had used throughout his childhood when imparting important lessons. "This isn't just about me or about one thoughtless young woman. It's about something bigger." Outside in the hallway, Mark paced back and forth, checking his watch every few seconds. The boutique had emptied of customers after the incident, and Thomas had temporarily closed the front door, placing a "back in 15 minutes" sign in the window. Jasmine sat on a bench near the staff break room, her shoulders hunched forward, staring blankly at the floor. "What do you think is happening in there?" she asked when Mark passed by for the 5th time. Mark stopped pacing and looked at her, exasperation clear on his face. "What do you think is happening?" "Dr. Johnson is talking to his mother who you accused of shoplifting and then physically grabbed, causing her to fall." He ran a hand through his already disheveled hair. "Do you have any idea how serious this is? Not just for you, but for all of us." Jasmine winced at his words. "I know I messed up. I panicked. I was trying to do what I thought you wanted, stopping theft, protecting inventory. By manhandling a customer?" Mark's voice rose before he caught himself and lowered it again. "That was never part of your training, Jasmine, never. I know that now." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I was wrong, so wrong, and I don't know how to fix it." Before Mark could respond, the office door opened and Raymond stepped out. His expression was serious but composed as he addressed Mark. "I'd like to see the security footage now. And afterward, I want to speak with the employee." Mark nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. The security monitors are in the back office. I can show you—" "I know where they are," Raymond said calmly. "This is my store, remember? But I'd like you to join me to provide any context for what we'll be seeing." As they walked toward the security office, Raymond glanced at Jasmine, who quickly looked away, unable to meet his gaze. Eleanor remained in the owner's office, seated in the comfortable chair, her cane resting against the armrest beside her. Though alone, she maintained her dignified posture, hands folded in her lap, gaze steady as she looked at the family photos on the wall. In the small security office, Raymond and Mark watched the footage in silence. The black and white video clearly showed Eleanor examining merchandise, losing her balance and knocking over the display. It also showed her bending to pick up the fallen items, placing them carefully back on the shelf, and then Jasmine's rapid approach. The accusation, and the moment when she grabbed Eleanor's arm, resulting in the fall. Raymond watched it twice, his expression unchanging. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured. The video is quite clear. There was no theft, not even an attempt, just an elderly woman trying to right a minor accident. Mark nodded, swallowing hard. Yes, sir. That's what the witnesses said as well. And yet your employee decided not only to accuse my mother of stealing, but to physically confront her. Raymond removed his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose, a gesture of fatigue or restraint, perhaps both. I need to understand why. I'll bring her in, Mark offered quickly. No, I'll speak with her in my office. My mother should be part of this conversation as well. Raymond replaced his glasses and stood. Give us 5 minutes, then bring her in. When Raymond returned to his office, Eleanor was looking at a recent family photo. Raymond, his wife, their 2 children, and Eleanor herself at his daughter's college graduation last spring. You saw the video? She asked without looking away from the photo. Yes. Raymond sat down across from her. It was exactly as you described. There was no justification for how you were treated. Eleanor nodded slowly, finally turning to face her son. And now you're going to fire that young woman. It wasn't a question, but Raymond answered anyway. That would be the standard response in this situation. Customer safety is paramount, and she violated that trust in the worst way. And what happens to her then? Eleanor asked. She loses her job, probably can't get a good reference, might struggle to find new employment. She'll carry this mistake with her, perhaps becoming more bitter, more defensive, more likely to repeat the same patterns of behavior elsewhere. Raymond studied his mother's face. At 78, she had lines etched by both joy and sorrow, wisdom earned through decades of experience, some of it painful. What are you suggesting, Mom? I'm suggesting that firing her might be the easiest solution, but not necessarily the best one. Eleanor leaned forward slightly. That young woman made assumptions about me based on what she saw, an old black woman who couldn't possibly belong in her fancy store. She acted on those assumptions without thinking, without giving me the basic respect of asking questions first. She paused, making sure her son was really listening. But what if instead of punishing her, we educated her? What if this mistake became an opportunity for her to learn and grow? Wouldn't that serve a greater purpose? Raymond shook his head slightly, a hint of a smile touching his lips. You're still teaching, aren't you? 30 years retired from the classroom and you're still looking for the teachable moment. Some habits are hard to break, Eleanor replied with a small smile of her own, and some lessons are too important not to share when the opportunity presents itself. A gentle knock on the door interrupted their conversation. Mark stood in the doorway, Jasmine slightly behind him, her face pale with anxiety. Dr. Johnson. Ms. Johnson, this is Jasmine Chen, Mark said formally, though it was obvious that introductions at this point were merely procedural. Raymond nodded. Please come in, Ms. Chen, have a seat. Jasmine entered the office with hesitant steps. She perched on the edge of the sofa, hands clasped tightly in her lap, eyes darting between Raymond, Eleanor, and the floor. Ms. Chen, Raymond began, his tone professional but not unkind. I've reviewed the security footage of the incident involving my mother. Before we discuss the consequences of your actions, I'd like to hear from you. Can you explain in your own words what happened and why? Jasmine took a shaky breath. Her voice cracked and she swallowed hard before continuing. I made a terrible mistake. I saw Mrs. Johnson by the display and I assumed she was taking something. We'd been told to watch for shoplifting and I just reacted. She glanced briefly at Eleanor before looking down again. I was wrong, so wrong. And I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am truly, deeply sorry. Eleanor studied the young woman, noting the genuine distress in her posture and voice. Why did you think I was stealing? She asked quietly. What did you see that made you jump to that conclusion? The directness of the question seemed to catch Jasmine off guard. I don't know. I saw movement in the disturbed display and... She stopped, the realization dawning on her face as she confronted her own assumptions. I didn't really see anything, did I? I just assumed, because of how I look? Eleanor pressed gently. Because of my age, my race? What was it about me that made thief the first thought in your mind? The room fell silent as Jasmine struggled with the question. It was Mark who finally broke the silence. Dr. Johnson, if I may, some of this responsibility falls on management as well. Our training has emphasized loss prevention, perhaps at the expense of customer respect and proper procedures. Raymond nodded thoughtfully. That's a fair point, Mark, and it's something we'll need to address. He turned back to Jasmine. But right now I'd like to hear Ms. Chen's answer to my mother's question. Jasmine looked up, tears welling in her eyes but not falling. I don't have a good answer, she admitted, her voice barely audible. And that's the problem, isn't it? I acted based on prejudice, on assumptions I didn't even realize I was making. She looked directly at Eleanor for the first time. Mrs. Johnson, I'm so sorry. Not just for what I did, but for why I did it. You deserved better. Much better. Eleanor held Jasmine's gaze for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she turned to her son. Raymond, I believe Ms. Chen and I have more to discuss. But perhaps we could continue this conversation with a bit more privacy. Raymond raised an eyebrow, surprised by the request. Are you sure, Mom? Quite sure. Eleanor's tone was one Raymond recognized well. The matter was decided. Raymond stood, gesturing for Mark to follow him. We'll be right outside if you need anything, he said, giving his mother a questioning look that she answered with a reassuring nod. As the door closed behind the two men, Eleanor and Jasmine were left alone in the quiet office, the weight of unspoken words hanging in the air between them. The office fell into silence after Raymond and Mark left. Jasmine sat perfectly still, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. Eleanor watched her for a moment, taking in the young woman's obvious distress. At 23, Jasmine was barely older than Eleanor's youngest grandchild. The thought gave Eleanor pause. She had always tried to see people as individuals, not just representatives of their generation or background. It was a courtesy she wished more people extended to her. How long have you worked here, Ms. Chen? Eleanor finally asked, her voice calm. Jasmine looked up, surprised by the ordinary nature of the question. 8 days, she admitted. I started last Monday. This is my first weekend shift. 8 days, Eleanor repeated thoughtfully. Not much time to learn the ropes of a new workplace, is it? No, ma'am. Jasmine straightened slightly in her seat. But that's no excuse for what I did. I should have known better. I did know better, Eleanor nodded slowly. Yes, you should have. And yet here we are. She adjusted her position in the chair, wincing slightly as her hip protested the movement. The fall had left her more sore than she'd initially let on. Tell me about yourself, Ms. Chen. What brought you to work at my son's store? Confusion flickered across Jasmine's face, but she answered anyway. I graduated from community college last spring with an associate's degree in business. I've been trying to find work in retail management, but most places want more experience. She glanced down at her hands. This job was supposed to be a stepping stone, a chance to learn the business from the ground up. And before that, what kind of work have you done? I worked at a coffee shop through college, and I helped my parents at their restaurant on weekends. A hint of pride entered Jasmine's voice. They came here with almost nothing 25 years ago. The restaurant was their dream. They wanted me to have more opportunities than they did. Eleanor considered this information. It's not easy, is it? Trying to live up to the dreams our parents have for us. The unexpected understanding in Eleanor's tone seemed to catch Jasmine off guard. No, she agreed softly. It's not. My son, Eleanor said, gesturing to the photographs on the wall, was the first in our family to go to college. His father worked 2 jobs to make that happen. Raymond worked even harder to get through medical school. Her voice carried the gentle pride of a mother who had witnessed her child's struggles and triumphs. Opening this store was his way of investing in the neighborhood he came from. Creating jobs, building something that would last. Jasmine glanced at the photos, seeing the progression of a family's journey through the years. I didn't know, she said quietly. Of course you didn't. Eleanor's tone wasn't accusatory, just matter of fact. You didn't ask. You didn't see me as someone with a story, with a family, with a life that mattered. You saw an old black woman who couldn't possibly belong in your nice store. The blunt assessment hung in the air between them. Jasmine didn't try to deny it, which Eleanor noted with a hint of approval. At least the girl could face an uncomfortable truth. Mrs. Johnson, Jasmine began hesitantly. I know I can't take back what I did. I know words don't fix this, But I want you to know how truly sorry I am. Her voice cracked slightly, not just because you turned out to be the owner's mother. I'd be just as sorry if you were anyone. No one deserves to be treated that way. Eleanor studied Jasmine's face for a long moment. I believe you mean that, she said finally. But meaning it today in this moment isn't enough. The real question is whether you'll remember this lesson tomorrow, and the day after, and 10 years from now. Outside the office, Raymond paced the hallway while Mark stood awkwardly by the water cooler. Through the closed door they could hear the murmur of voices but couldn't make out any words. Should we check on them? Mark asked nervously. It's been almost 15 minutes, Raymond shook his head. My mother asked for privacy and we'll give her that. He checked his watch. But I do need to make some decisions about how we're moving forward. The store should be reopening soon. As if on cue, Thomas appeared at the end of the hallway. Dr. Johnson? We have customers waiting outside. Should we remain closed or... Raymond considered for a moment. Reopen business as usual, but keep an eye out for any press or social media activity. If anyone asks questions about what happened earlier, direct them to Mark or myself. Thomas nodded and hurried back to the front of the store. Raymond resumed his pacing, his mind working through the implications of the morning's events. As a business owner, he needed to consider the liability issues, the potential for negative publicity, the impact on staff morale. As a son, his priority was his mother's well-being and dignity. Finding the right balance between these concerns wasn't simple. Back in the office, Eleanor had shifted the conversation in an unexpected direction. What would you do differently if you could go back to this morning? She asked Jasmine. Jasmine blinked, taken aback by the hypothetical question. Obviously I wouldn't accuse you or grab you. Eleanor shook her head. No, that's too easy. Let's say you still had the same suspicion. What should you have done instead of what you did? Jasmine thought about it seriously. I should have approached you respectfully. Introduced myself. Asked if you needed any help with the merchandise. I could have stayed nearby, watching discreetly if I was still concerned. She paused. Or I could have alerted a manager to my concerns instead of taking matters into my own hands. Yes, Eleanor agreed. Any of those would have been better choices. But they all require seeing the other person as worthy of basic respect and the benefit of the doubt. She leaned forward slightly. That's what was missing this morning, Ms. Chen. Not just proper procedure, but basic human respect. Jasmine nodded, the weight of Eleanor's words sinking in. You're right, and I don't know how to make that right. You don't, Eleanor said simply. At least not in one conversation, not with one apology. It takes time to truly change how we see people, how we think about them before we even speak to them. She tapped her cane gently against the floor, but recognizing the problem is the first step. The door opened then and Raymond looked in. Mom, everything okay? Eleanor nodded. Yes, Raymond. Ms. Chen and I have had a productive conversation. I think it's time we discussed next steps. Raymond entered, followed by Mark, who closed the door behind them. The four of them formed an uneven circle, Eleanor in her armchair, Jasmine on the edge of the sofa, Raymond standing behind his mother, and Mark hovering uncertainly near the door. I've reviewed the security footage and spoken with witnesses, Raymond began formally. It's clear that what happened this morning was completely unacceptable. Our policy strictly prohibits physical contact with customers under any circumstances, and falsely accusing someone of theft is equally serious. Jasmine nodded, her shoulders slumping as she prepared herself for the inevitable. Under normal circumstances, Raymond continued, immediate termination would be the appropriate response. I understand, Jasmine whispered. Eleanor placed her hand on her son's arm. Raymond, before you continue, I'd like to share my thoughts on the matter. Raymond looked down at his mother, a silent communication passing between them. He nodded for her to continue. Ms. Chen made a serious mistake today, Eleanor said, addressing the room at large. One that hurt me physically and emotionally. One that could have legal consequences for this business if I were the type of person to pursue such matters. She paused, making sure everyone was listening carefully. But I don't believe firing her is the right response. Mark's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Jasmine's head snapped up, disbelief written across her face. Mom? Raymond's voice held a note of question. Hear me out, Eleanor said calmly. Firing Ms. Chen would be the easy solution. She'd be gone, and with her the problem, at least on the surface. But what would that accomplish, really? She'd move on to another job, carrying the same unconscious biases, perhaps becoming more careful about hiding them but not necessarily addressing them. She turned slightly to look directly at Jasmine. And you'd lose an opportunity to truly learn and grow from this mistake. To become not just a better employee but a better person. Raymond considered his mother's words. What are you suggesting instead? I'm suggesting that real change requires more than punishment. It requires education, reflection, and accountability. Eleanor's voice took on the measured tone she had used during her decades as a teacher. I propose that Ms. Chen be placed on probation rather than terminated. During that time, she should complete comprehensive training on implicit bias, customer service, and proper security protocols. She glanced at Mark. And I suggest that all staff receive similar training. What happened today wasn't entirely Ms. Chen's fault. It was also a failure of management to properly train and supervise a new employee. Mark had the grace to look abashed. You're absolutely right, Mrs. Johnson. We can definitely implement better training for all staff. Additionally, Eleanor continued, I think Ms. Chen should work with community organizations that serve elderly residents and people of color, not as punishment, but as an opportunity to expand her understanding and challenge her assumptions. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed Eleanor's proposal. It was Raymond who finally spoke. Mom, are you sure this is what you want? After what happened today, no one would blame you for wanting more. Decisive action, Eleanor smiled slightly. At my age, Raymond, I've learned that the most decisive action isn't always the most effective one. Ms. Chen made a mistake based on assumptions and prejudice. Firing her won't change those assumptions, not for her and certainly not for anyone else. She turned to Jasmine, her expression serious but not unkind. This won't be easy. It would be simpler for you to walk away, find another job, and try to forget this happened. What I'm suggesting requires real work, real reflection. Are you willing to do that? Jasmine looked at Eleanor with new eyes, not seeing just an elderly woman, but someone offering wisdom and, remarkably, a second chance she hadn't expected and wasn't sure she deserved. Yes, she said firmly, finding her voice at last. Yes, I am. If you're willing to give me that opportunity, I promise I won't waste it. Raymond studied his mother's face, then Jasmine's, weighing the sincerity he saw in both. Finally, he nodded. All right. We'll try it your way, Mom. He turned to Mark. Draw up the terms of probation and the training requirements. I want to review them before they're implemented. Of course, Dr. Johnson, Mark replied, already mentally drafting the document. And Ms. Chen, Raymond continued, his tone serious. Understand that this is an opportunity few would receive in your position. My mother is showing extraordinary grace here. Don't mistake it for weakness or lack of awareness about what happened today. I understand completely, Jasmine assured him, her voice steady for the first time since the incident. And I'm grateful for the chance to make this right. Eleanor watched the exchange with quiet satisfaction. She had always believed in the power of education to transform lives, to challenge assumptions, to open minds. Today, in this unexpected way, she was still teaching, still making a difference. As Raymond helped her to her feet, she caught a glimpse of the family photos on the wall, a visual reminder of how far they had come, of the obstacles overcome, of lessons learned and passed down through generations. Some lessons were harder than others, but perhaps those were the ones most worth teaching. 2 weeks had passed since the incident at Riverside Boutique. The summer heat had intensified, blanketing the city in a wave of humidity that left even the shortest walk feeling like a journey. Yet despite the oppressive weather, Eleanor Johnson found herself once again walking toward her son's store, her cane tapping a steady rhythm on the sidewalk. This time, however, she wasn't alone. Her granddaughter Tanya walked beside her, occasionally placing a supportive hand under Eleanor's elbow when the sidewalk became uneven. Grandma, are you sure you want to do this? Tanya asked, concern evident in her voice. After what happened last time, that's precisely why I need to go back, dear, Eleanor replied calmly. I won't let one bad experience keep me away from Raymond's store. Besides, I never did find you that graduation gift. Tanya smiled, though worry still lingered in her eyes. At 22, she had just completed her bachelor's degree in literature and was preparing for graduate school in the fall. She had her grandmother's quiet determination and her father's analytical mind, a combination that had served her well in her studies. Dad said there's some kind of community event happening today, Tanya said as they approached the boutique.
Something about local history?
Eleanor nodded. Yes, that was part of the plan we discussed. Connecting the store more deeply with the neighborhood. She didn't elaborate further, but there was a hint of satisfaction in her voice. As they neared Riverside Boutique, they could see that something unusual was indeed happening. The store's front window displayed a new sign, Community Heritage Day, join us. Through the large glass windows, they could see that the interior had been rearranged. Display tables had been pushed to the sides to create an open area in the center, where chairs were set up facing a small podium. The bell chimed as they entered, but this time, the sound was nearly lost amid the gentle buzz of conversation. The boutique was filled with people, some browsing merchandise, others seated and chatting. A few examining photographs and artifacts displayed on easels around the room. Mark spotted them first and quickly made his way over. Mrs. Johnson, Ms. Johnson, welcome. His greeting was warm and genuine. Dr. Johnson mentioned you might be joining us today. He's just finishing up a call in the office, but asked me to get you settled when you arrived. Thank you, Mark, Eleanor said with a nod. The store looks wonderful. I see you've been busy. We have indeed. Mark gestured toward the arranged seating. The local history presentation begins in about 20 minutes. Can I get you something to drink while you wait? Water, tea? Water would be lovely, thank you. As Mark went to fetch their drinks, Tanya leaned closer to her grandmother. Everyone's being so nice, Eleanor smiled. Amazing what a little accountability can do. Before Tanya could ask what she meant, they were approached by Thomas, who carried a small stack of printed programs. Mrs. Johnson, it's good to see you again. His greeting was respectful but not overly formal. These are for our guests. The first presentation starts at 2, followed by a panel discussion with local business owners and community leaders. Eleanor accepted a program. Thank you, Thomas. It sounds well organized. Dr. Johnson wanted everything to be perfect, Thomas replied with a small smile. Oh, and he asked me to show you to the reserved seats in the front when you're ready. As Thomas moved on to distribute more programs, Tanya and Eleanor made their way slowly around the perimeter of the room, examining the displays. Vintage photographs showed the neighborhood through the decades, from the early days when it had been a working-class area with small family-owned shops, through periods of economic struggle, and into the present era of revitalization. I remember some of these places, Eleanor commented, pointing to a black-and-white photo of a row of storefronts from the 1960s. Your grandfather used to take me dancing at that corner hall every Saturday night. Tanya smiled at the image of her grandparents as young people in love dancing the night away. You never told me that story. There are many stories about this neighborhood, Eleanor replied. Some joyful, some painful, all part of our history. She moved to the next display, which featured newspaper clippings and photographs documenting the civil rights era and its impact on the local community. As they continued their circuit of the room, Eleanor noticed Jasmine standing near one of the displays speaking with an elderly gentleman who was pointing to something in a photograph. She wore her store uniform, but her posture was different, more attentive, less harried than during their first encounter. Jasmine looked up and saw Eleanor watching her. For a moment, uncertainty flickered across her face. Then, excusing herself from the conversation, she approached Eleanor and Tanya. Mrs. Johnson, she greeted, her voice steady but respectful. It's good to see you again. Eleanor nodded. Ms. Chen, I see you're helping with the event today. Yes, ma'am. I've been working with the local historical society to put together these displays. Jasmine gestured to the materials around them. I've learned so much about the neighborhood's history in the past 2 weeks. There was a genuine enthusiasm in her voice that hadn't been there before. Eleanor recognized it as the spark that often came with new understanding, the excitement of seeing the world through a different lens. This is my granddaughter Tanya, Eleanor said, making introductions. Tanya, this is Jasmine Chen. It's nice to meet you, Tanya said, though her tone carried a hint of coolness. She had heard about the incident from her father. Jasmine seemed to sense the slight reservation. It's nice to meet you too. She hesitated, then added, Your grandmother has taught me a lot. I'm grateful for the opportunity to learn from her wisdom. Before the conversation could continue, Raymond's voice called out from across the room. Mom, Tanya! He made his way through the gathering crowd, embracing his daughter and then carefully hugging his mother. "I'm so glad you both made it. What do you think of our first community event?" "It's impressive," Eleanor said, genuine approval in her voice. "You've put together something meaningful here." Raymond beamed with pride. "We couldn't have done it without our community partners. And," he added with a significant glance at Jasmine, "without the dedication of our staff." Jasmine ducked her head slightly at the praise. "I should check on the refreshments before the presentation starts," she said. "It was good to see you again, Mrs. Johnson, and nice to meet you, Tanya." As Jasmine moved away, Tanya raised an eyebrow at her grandmother. "That's her?" "The one who—" Eleanor nodded. "Yes, she's been working hard these past 2 weeks." "Working on what exactly?" Tanya asked, curiosity overcoming her initial coolness. Raymond answered, keeping his voice low. "In addition to her regular duties, Jasmine has been completing a comprehensive training program on implicit bias and proper security protocols. She's also been volunteering with the Senior Citizens Center 3 evenings a week and working with the Historical Society on this project." "That was all part of her probation?" Tanya asked. "Not probation," Eleanor corrected gently. "Growth, there's a difference." Raymond checked his watch. "We should get you both seated. The presentation will begin soon." He led them to the front row of chairs and helped Eleanor get settled comfortably. As more people filed in and took their seats, Eleanor observed the room with quiet satisfaction. What had begun as an unfortunate incident had transformed into something unexpected. A catalyst for change, not just for one young woman, but for the entire store and perhaps even the wider community. Mark stepped up to the podium as the clock struck 2. "Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Riverside Boutique's first Community Heritage Day. We're honored to have so many neighbors and friends join us for this special event." He went on to explain the purpose of the gathering: to celebrate the rich history of the neighborhood, to acknowledge both its triumphs and challenges, and to strengthen the connections between longtime residents and newer businesses. "Before we begin our formal presentation," Mark continued, "Dr. Johnson would like to say a few words." Raymond took the podium, his presence commanding yet warm. "Thank you all for coming today. When I decided to open Riverside Boutique in this neighborhood, it was more than a business decision. It was personal. I grew up just 3 blocks from here. My parents built their lives in this community." He paused, finding his mother's face in the audience. This store was meant to be both a successful business and a positive presence in the neighborhood. But 2 weeks ago, we failed in that mission when a valued customer, my own mother, was treated disrespectfully in these very rooms. A murmur rippled through the audience. Some already knew the story. Others were hearing it for the first time. That incident forced us to look hard at ourselves, at our training procedures, at our values, at the way we engage with our community. Raymond's voice was earnest, without defensiveness, and rather than simply move on from that mistake, we decided to learn from it, to grow, to do better. He gestured to the displays around the room. Today's event is part of that commitment. By understanding our shared history, by recognizing the experiences that have shaped our community, we hope to foster greater respect and connection among all who walk through these doors. As Raymond continued his speech, Eleanor felt a gentle touch on her shoulder. She turned to find Jasmine standing beside her chair, a small gift bag in her hands. "For you," Jasmine whispered, placing the bag in Eleanor's lap before slipping away again. Curious, Eleanor opened the bag. Inside was a small silver necklace with a pendant shaped like a book, the very item she had been looking at on the day of the incident. Attached was a handwritten note. "Mrs. Johnson, thank you for the most valuable lesson I've ever learned. Your wisdom and grace changed not just my career, but my perspective. With deepest respect and gratitude, Jasmine." Eleanor closed her fingers around the necklace, a smile touching her lips. She had spent decades in classrooms teaching young minds, but sometimes the most important lessons happened in unexpected places. The boutique had become more than just her son's business. It had become a classroom of life, where one difficult moment had bloomed into opportunity for genuine change. As Raymond concluded his speech and introduced the local historian who would give the main presentation, Eleanor leaned over to Tanya. "Here," she said, pressing the necklace into her granddaughter's hand. "I found your graduation gift after all." Tanya examined the book-shaped pendant with delight. "It's perfect, Grandma. Thank you. Don't thank me, Eleanor replied softly, watching as Jasmine helped an elderly gentleman to a newly vacated seat. Sometimes the most meaningful gifts come from the most unexpected sources. The afternoon sun streamed through the boutique's windows, casting a warm glow over the gathered community. Young and old, longtime residents and newcomers all sharing space and stories. What had begun with tension and misunderstanding had transformed into connection and growth. It wasn't perfect, and there would surely be more lessons to learn in the days ahead. But for now, in this moment, Eleanor Johnson felt the satisfaction of knowing that wisdom shared was never wasted, and that even at 78, she was still making a difference in her corner of the world.